and welcome to the Fielding Alumni Focus Webinar Special Edition, our Alumni Track Presenter Spotlight with Louise Korver. My name is Hillary Molina, and I'm the Associate Director for Alumni Relations here at Fielding. Now, the goal of these webinars are to connect and engage alumni from all over the world and share with you the news and events at Fielding. So the conversation does not stop here. First of all, I want to let you know that this is being recorded, and it will be posted on our portal system in My Fielding, as is any of our previous webinars. If you need any help accessing My Fielding, please send me an email at alumnirelations@fielding.edu, and I'm more than happy to help you. Also, you can post comments and engage in discussion with other alumni and students, so I highly encourage you to check out our new version of what many of you remember to be Felix. So today's special guest is alumni Louise Korver. Louise is a presenter at this year's Alumni Track series at our National Summer Session, which is being held this year in Rosemont, Illinois in July. Today she will be sharing an overview of her presentation at Summer Session and is going to dive a little bit deeper into her subject, which is global leadership. Before I introduce Louise, I wanted to let you know how this webinar will be conducted. So before I start, just a few instructions. Wanted to let you know that you, as the participant, you don't need to worry about your video and you don't need to worry about your audio. You get to sit back, relax, and enjoy the content today. But I want to make sure that you know we want to hear from you. And we do have the opportunity for question and answer. If you scroll to the very top of your screen, there's a drop-down box that'll say Q&A. Right in there, you can go ahead and type your questions. If you have any questions directly for me, if you're having any technical difficulties, I will see all of that right there. I can reply to you via text, or I can ask the questions of Louise during the webinar. So go ahead and kind of play around with your screen a little bit so you can see where that is, and we do encourage you to participate that way. So that's it for our instructions, and today it is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's featured guest, Louise Korver.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. So let me go ahead and give you a little bio of Louise. Let me tell you about how fantastic she is. Louise is a Fielding Master's alumna and HOD, a graduate of 2008. And she is a current student in our evidence-based coaching program, EBC. Louise is also an alumna of executive programs at Harvard Business School and Wharton. She plans to obtain her doctorate from Fielding in 2017. Louise has served as head of executive development at some of the largest companies in the world while completing her Fielding studies, and she has spent a lot of time in private consulting. Louise brings her experience across multiple industries with views informed by her distinguished career as head of the Global Enterprise Executive Development Functions at Bank of America, EMC Corporation, and AT&T. These are academy companies recognized for their best practices, and especially at EMC and AT&T are award-winning universities recognized by this organization. Louise also received the Elite Gold Award in 2019 for the executive coaching practice she developed herself at EMC. Louise has a passion for leadership, executive development, and focuses on high potential women and global leaders. She has served on the boards of Artistry Institute, which is the Wharton Business School, chaired program committees of the Conference Board for Executive Coaching and Leadership Development, and served on the advisory board of the Human Capital Institute. She was elected in 2015 as judge for the Chief of Learning Officer magazine and Learning and Practice Awards, and serves on their Business Intelligence Board. My goodness, it's quite a background, Louise. She is also an author and guest lecturer in executive programs. Louise is a certified mentor at Davidson College, a certified coach in the McCall School Leadership Coaching Program at Queen's University of Charlotte, and on the Gold Award Committee and faculty for the Real World Series Leadership with the Girl Scouts of Charlotte, North Carolina. For our session today, Louise is going to share some of her research insights as well as the practical realities of developing leaders for global executives. So Louise, now we get to get started with you. Enough of me talking. To kick things off today, I'd like to ask Louise a couple of questions about thinking global. So Louise, to start with, what were the factors that contributed to you researching your particular topic?
Well, thanks, Hillary. It's really great to be here. I think if I could take everybody back to a couple of the companies that I've worked for, particularly Ingersoll Rand in 2002 and 2003, the company started going to China in great waves. and we had 26 different business units that were all trying to get to China at the same time. So they were all buying research from different organizations, most of them McKinsey, and were mostly concerned about how to take their products and services into China. But very few of them have ever traveled to China and didn't understand the culture, the language, and just the general ways of doing business there. And so this was a great opportunity for me to bring a first program out and to get some of the executives to feel more confident with what they were going to do when they were heading over to China to start their operations there. And then when I went to Bank of America, something very similar happened in the 2007-2008 timeframe, because Bank of America was involved in a very large program with the China Construction Bank, which was sponsored by the Chinese government, to create a retail banking platform across the country of China. And of course, Bank of America was really the best in breed in being able to do that. And so we were asked to join that initiative. And as a result, we were sending our executives over to China. And I listened as they came back from each of those initial trips saying, wow, I don't understand what's going on. They're taking us out drinking all hours, and then we have to get up early and have meetings. And there must be something you can teach us about how to do this. And so I was able to put together a very, very deep program to explain the culture, the geography, the politics, a lot of the local business customs that the executives needed to understand. And we even did such things as hosting formal dinners for them so that they would understand how to eat at a traditional Chinese table. And most of all, something as simple as being able to serve themselves food from a general table that didn't have serving pieces. No one knew what to do with that. So everything from being able to learn to give a toast in the local language to their host country executives, as well as to learn how to function well in different business negotiations. This was really what I would say the deepest and most significant work that got me started in looking at globalization and global leadership development as what I wanted to do my dissertation on at Fielding.
That's really fantastic. That's a great insight. And so actually the next question is perfect. How did your time at Fielding help connect you further to this topic?
Well, really, from the beginning, I was able to work with Keith Melville, as most everyone who's in HOD knows Keith. Keith suggested that I take my very first course as KA, I think it was 717, globalization, and that helped me get into the literature. And as Keith said, I found my cocktail party conversation. I found that small group of scholars who were very focused on global leadership development. And from there, I was able to get involved with those scholars through the Academy of Management. And by attending the Academy as a student, under the Fielding banner, I was able to put some of my early work out into some of the working groups that they have at the Academy. And it introduced me to even more of faculty from other universities around the world who could give me feedback on my research plan. So it was absolutely central for me to be able to do something like that at the same time that my work required me to come up with these kinds of solutions.
So can you talk a little bit about what you're doing now in your professional life that is related to your presentation today?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Well, so I've been coaching for a long time, and most recently, last March, as a matter of fact, I was engaged with a company to support an executive who was a vice president and general manager of an organization in the United States who also serves as the chairman of the board for 2 international joint ventures. And so as a leadership development coach, what I was asked to do was to develop him further for his global leadership, as well as helping him with his general management practices here in the United States. And so when I joined the EDC program at Fielding, I was able to get really deep into the literature on coaching, which I had not previously been introduced to. And more especially, I was able to learn about the cognitive behavioral coaching that was introduced through the program. and to understand how that would be a fast track to help executives who are currently in global roles develop themselves for being more successful globally. So had it not been for the timing of that client and the EBC program, I may not have gotten there, but as a result, I was able to learn so much that I'm happy to share it with our alumni.
Well, thank you so much, Louise. That sounds like timing has worked out very well. So what I'd like to do is, our format for today is to kick off the discussion about key developmental questions that present challenges for companies, leaders, and practitioners in developing leaders in place. And then Louise will provide our webinar audience, all of you, with a little taste of an important new global leadership competency model that she sees is fundamental to her work in the field. So first, Louise, can you share with us whether you think companies need to send leaders overseas to get that global leadership skill experience?
I think that's a really great question, Hillary. I certainly can. I think while sending someone offshore certainly creates a sense of urgency for learning, if an executive and his or her family are going to be expatriated, they have to do some very intensive work. But it's really no longer necessary, and it's certainly much less expensive to find an alternative to that. And that's what I really want to talk with our group about today, and what we'll be exploring more fully when we're at summer session. So it's not only important to find a way around just sending people offshore, but it's also more practical, and I think it's really essential.
So next question, isn't there a better way to develop global competency right now without waiting for the opportunity to expatriate leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, some of the things that I mentioned previously about being able to introduce people to cultures and language and some of the general ways of doing business in another country, or being aware of the differences between their leadership style and practices in the domestic US market and people that are right on their team today that they need to lead differently. These are all things that we don't have to send someone offshore for. It's kind of really like situational leadership on steroids, but we need to do a lot of work with the executive themselves, because a lot of the things that hold executives back from being successful globally are really inside out kind of skills, which is really understanding and developing more self-awareness, having an appreciation for how they're coming across to others, and also to fundamentally learn some of the basics about that other country, that other culture, and ways of doing business. So I don't think it's something that we have to wait to send just a handful of people offshore to do. I really do think it's an opportunity for us to broaden this and to develop leaders who are in place today and who have the opportunity to get better right now in the current job that they have. And so I really hope today to be able to share a little bit about some of the things that I did my doc study on. And ironically, here we are 16 years on. There was a 2-year study done by a company, Tucker International, where they studied the relationship between competence in globalization and business performance. And they studied 1,800 leaders from 13 nationalities, and they defined global leaders as those who were CEOs, general managers, function heads, or those with P&L responsibility, no matter what their title was. And they had to be currently in that role, and they had to be leading people across different cultures. And so what their research showed us that over the last 15 years, we have seen so many different global competency models come out. Those of us who follow this find it a confusing maze of different words that sometimes mean the same thing, that are measured differently, and sometimes are completely different measures. In fact, there are about 50 different global leadership competencies. And so scholars and practitioners have started to define what it means to have global mindset, what it means to be a global leader, and what global competencies are all about. And we can agree at least on 9 of those competencies, and also 3 general leadership criteria that make the difference in being able to be successful on a global scale. I think what we see here on this slide are those 3 key areas: the worldview, which is their ability to be open-minded to others; their interest in learning all their lives, so not feeling like they've already got all the understanding they need, but they have to be open to learning more. There's a situational approach, which we might classically think of as emotional intelligence, but it goes much farther than that. We're talking about patience, the ability to be patient with anyone, anywhere, especially if you have to be patient while they're trying to speak English or while you're trying to understand a foreign language. Next is to have an even disposition. One of the telling tales is that if in English you have a rather basic, even keel, very stable personality, but when you start dealing with people from other countries, you don't. That's very off-putting for the people that you're dealing with from different cultures. Next is being able to navigate ambiguity. I think we would all agree that there is a lot to get our arms around when we're doing business globally, whether it has to do with language, time of day for meetings, the expectations of social time, dealing with different currencies, dealing with how to get product in and out of a country. All of these things are highly ambiguous and change almost daily. And so someone needs to have the ability to navigate that ambiguity. The next is an internal locus of control. So similar to having an even disposition is just this core substance of the person that you can feel is under control most of the time. And then finally, under situational approach, being able to demonstrate creativity, because there isn't just one way to do things. And even what worked yesterday may not work today. So being open to creative ways to approach business problems. And then finally, in the social and interpersonal areas, is being able to adapt to different types of social encounters that you deal with. Certain organizations of people who are traveling around the world find that they have to change some of the basics, like shaking hands, or whether they should cross their legs in meetings and things like that. And of course, for women, it's knowing if you have to wear a burqa, it's knowing whether or not you should shake a man's hand. There's all issues to deal with. And then finally is being able to instill trust in others. So these 9 particular areas of competence that are broken up into what we would call 3 significant factors are half of the interpersonal constructs that we need to get good at if we're going to operate on a global scale. And then there are also the 3 leadership success criteria, which are not on this slide, but I'll mention here, and we'll deal with it more deeply in July when we get into summer session. Those 3 leadership criteria are our ability to network globally, our ability to drive performance globally, and finally, building team effectiveness. So I think we probably all agree that these things matter in leadership in general, but they play a significant role in executive success globally. So I think most of the work that you see in general leadership development today are on that social, cultural, or interpersonal style of a leader. But there are some that are so significant, so fundamental, that a global leader just can't operate at a global scale without it. And that's the ability to adapt to their social environment and their ability to instill trust. So those are 2 that most significantly we need to work on. And, being able to do that is, as I said before, comes from the inside of that executive. So during this summer session, I'm going to go much more deeply into this, but I think for purposes of today, I just wanted to connect this with some new work in a global competency model. I think will be exciting for those of you who lead leadership development, or for those of you who might be coaching executives with global responsibilities. I'm wondering, Hillary, is this a good place for us to stop to see if we have questions from our group?
Yeah, great question. Actually, there was a question that someone said this might not be the best place to ask this, but it's a very practical question.
Okay.
And this person is kind of honing in on how to learn social adaptation depending on the country that maybe you're focusing on. I don't know if you have a quick example of maybe how do you find or research some basic social adaptation skills and techniques?
Well, that's a really great question. And of course, I'll offer a lot of resources in our session in July, but I can suffice it to say that one of the least expensive and most effective tools that I have found for executives is a tool called GlobeSmart from Aperion Global. What that does is introduces you to the countries that you're doing business in It offers you how to pronounce people's names. As something as simple as that can make all the difference in the world. How to say hello, how to say thank you, how to say, can I have a beer? Where's the bathroom? Things like that can make a huge difference in being socially adaptable without feeling a great deal of stress while you're doing it. And you can do this from the comforts of your office or your home or an app. And so it's an online tool that will help people assess their differences interpersonally and culturally with people from other countries. And it will also guide and help them in learning about the local politics, the geography, the history, the currency, and a variety of other cultural things that are critically important. And I would classify that as knowledge centered. So that is something that you can study and learn and practice. And then being able to make it behavioral, which I think may also underlie your person's question here, is to be able to practice that with a coach and to express what current anxieties you have about being able to do that.
Excellent. Thank you. That's it for now.
Well, that was a great question. So because I'm a leadership geek, I'd like to go on to the next slide and just talk about a new global leadership model. So first, we're going to look at something I'm calling the vertical behavior change mapping. Now, this is drawn from the work of Bob Kegan and Leahy from Harvard, who are cognitive psychologists, who have talked about levels of consciousness of adults. And so we're going to draw from Leahy's and Kagan's work, because what we're talking about here is that you may have at level 1 some behavioral goals you're trying to achieve, such as act more comfortably around people in different cultures. The second, we're going to have to look at what behaviors work against that goal in your normal life. And so being able to work with someone to help understand what makes them nervous, what creates anxiety, what makes them feel okay and comfortable. Those are the kinds of things that those first 2 levels deal with. But the third and the fourth deal with something that is a higher level of consciousness. What Kagan's work tells us is that we have hidden competing commitments in our life. Hidden commitment would be, I don't want to sound like an idiot pronouncing someone's name in a foreign language, so therefore I'm just going to say it in English and shake their hand when I meet them. Well, there's some sort of hidden competing commitment in there that you're making, which is, I have a commitment to control my own anxiety, and I'm much more concerned about that than I am seeming to be in control of myself in speaking a foreign language. But we have to, as coaches and leadership developers, get underneath that hidden and competing commitment and make sure that we've aligned our goals with someone's ability to learn that language, or even just learn someone's name, to be able to say it right off the cuff without feeling nervous about it. And there are also some big assumptions. For example, if I say the person's name incorrectly, they're going to think I'm an idiot, therefore I'm not even going to try. That's a big assumption. I think what we would find is that most people who don't speak English as their first language are very grateful at your attempts to say their name, or attempts to say hello in another language, or attempts to go along with different social customs that are not familiar to you. And so when we're working with executives, we need to understand that it's some very heavy lifting to deal with these hidden assumptions that people have that get in the way of being able to actually accomplish their goal to be more successful and more comfortable on a global scale. So a coach can help unpack some of that in this vertical behavior mapping that we're talking about. And basically, we're talking about developing levels of consciousness of an adult. So we draw heavily from cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, and we do something called cognitive behavioral coaching. And so I was using this particular technique with the executive I mentioned previously. And during our July session, I'm going to take you through a case study of the homework assignments that I gave him, the experiments that I had to do in preparation for different negotiations he was involved in, and in a lot of ways just helped him to develop his own higher level consciousness of how to function on a global scale. And so if our own anxiety, our protection system, if you will, impacts our knowing system, it really doesn't matter how much you know about globalization, about a country's different economic conditions or history. What really matters is making our behavior coherent and aligned with our values and with our expression of those values in our behaviors. So we really have to help people think this through, and we have to help them understand what's standing in the way of their own ability to implement what they're learning to do. And so our personal map here, as you see on this slide, is a vertical change map. It's helping people to think through and understand their own underlying assumptions and understand what the competing commitments are that are preventing them from behaving properly. And so we're applying this framework in the design and the development of cognitive issues. But let's go ahead and look at the other dimension, which is the more traditional leadership dimension on the next slide. And that really is looking at the horizontal competencies. And those horizontal competencies, once again, align around the 9 fundamental global leadership skills and competencies that I defined on a previous chart. When you layer these two together, the vertical and the horizontal, you have situational ability, you have self-control and awareness, and then you are starting to apply that even disposition, that locus of control, that ability to demonstrate creativity and so forth within an individual who's working very hard to keep aligned their own hidden agenda and their own big assumptions as they work with different people from around the world. So I think it's really hard to get to those vertical behaviors. And this is where the beauty of this model really comes into full use. Only through development simultaneously of those horizontal competencies and those vertical competencies can we help someone develop a very accelerated path toward global leadership development. So let me stop right here and see if anyone in the audience has questions about the model or might want to dig into some of the assumptions that I've made as I've presented today.
Actually, there is a question here that I thought would be great to bring to you. Someone asked, can you give an example in either your experience or one of your clients or a colleague of yours where a big assumption affected a business transaction and what they could have done differently to perhaps make that business transaction actually complete, but because they did something they shouldn't have done, it affected that business transaction. Do you have any examples of that?
Well, I can give you one right off the top of my head that almost killed the deal for Bank of America. That was walking into the boardroom in, it was either Beijing or Shanghai, I can't remember which now. And the gentleman took his wallet out of his back pocket, opened it to grab a business card for each person from the board he was meeting with. And he threw the business cards out on the table like he was dealing a deck of cards in Las Vegas. So if you know anything about the Chinese, number one, business cards are an honorary piece of important technology as people introduce one to another. You don't want them bent or frayed. You don't want anything to be damaged about your business card because it's a representation of you and your professionalism and your standing in society. So here we had an American executive take his wallet out of his back pocket, and he had business cards that were all bent and shaped the same as his wallet, and they were still warm from being in his back pocket, which had just spent something like 25 hours on an airplane. And then he threw them out at people rather than carefully presenting them to his hosts. And as a result, there was kind of an immediate horror that happened when people thought, this man doesn't really know anything about our culture. So it didn't stop the deal, but it certainly caused some cultural awareness to happen immediately about how little the Americans knew about the heritage and culture of the people that they were doing business with. So that's just one very simple and perhaps maybe not as tangible as the deal falling apart, but it certainly had an effect on the relationships that were being developed. Does that help, or shall I go on and give you another one?
Absolutely. Actually, that was great. I think you got to the heart of the question. An example like that was great. The last one that I have here to ask you about is another. Can you give an example from your vertical behavior change mapping number 2, behaviors which work against the goals? Can you give an example or an illustration of a behavior that worked against a goal in a business transaction?
Sure. So one of the clients that I have served is the chairman of the board of a joint venture with a Saudi Arabian country. And he is an American born and bred in Texas. And as a result, as those of you who have regional knowledge might know, those who were in the oil and gas and agricultural businesses in Texas have quite a position on how good America is in being able to provide in those particular industries. And they may or may not have any expertise or even experience dealing with people from the Middle East, in particular Saudi Arabia. And so the executive that I was talking about had formed an opinion about Saudi Arabians based on what he had heard, based on their formal dress, based on some experiences that had been conveyed to him about how they spend their weekends in Dubai and how differently they act when they're in Dubai than they do when they're in Saudi Arabia. Having formed that opinion, it caused him to recoil at the thought of doing business with these other executives who were governmental agents of the royal family. And so he was having quite a time himself trying to appreciate how to act in that situation and how not to let show his dismay or disgust or just general uncomfortableness with the individuals that he was dealing with. So there wasn't anything hidden about it. He told me right out how it felt to try to do business with these individuals and what it was he's going to have to get a grip on so that it didn't show when he was doing business with them. So I hope maybe that can provide just an understanding at a superficial level of something that could get in the way and cause you to act in ways that you didn't realize you were doing, even though you're trying really hard to stick to the business and talk about the bottom line impact of a deal. You're still you're dealing with these really superordinate personal feelings that are getting in the way of your own behaviors. I hope that's helpful in some way to put some at least some guardrails around the issues that we'll be talking about in July, because it can go much deeper than that, but it usually starts with something that people are quite well aware of.
That's great, Louise. Thank you so much for that. That's the last question here, and it's actually a great segue into maybe a quick overview of what your workshop will be in July.
Okay, well, great. What I'm planning to do is to present tools for how to assess and how to develop global leaders on an accelerated basis for those people who are currently in global roles or shortly will be. The workshop is going to provide an overview of the latest global leadership development theories and models. And so the model that I presented to you today will be one of maybe 5 or 6 that we will look at. I'm also going to provide some best practice assessment tools and some competency models, as well as a definition of what development really looks like and how to define development for global leaders. Probably, for me anyhow, the most exciting part is going to be a case study that will take you through an executive assessment and the cognitive behavioral coaching techniques to help develop a global leader in their current role. And that's what I mean by developing global leaders in place. They don't have to go anywhere. They don't have to do anything but develop, but we have to do so in a very specific way without the time-consuming and expensive process of sending them overseas. I think it should prove to be a great end to the summer session. We're going to be doing this on Friday, July 15th, the final afternoon before graduation on Saturday. And I certainly hope people will be able to join us for that, because I think it's going to be a really enriching session.
Great. Thank you, Louise. And One last question I had about your session, and we can
Mhm.
talk. You can talk a little bit further about this. Is this session is open to both alumni and students? So, can you talk a little bit about if a student is kind of towards the end when they're looking at graduation on the horizon, how this would be a really perfect fit for them in their studies and kind of in their planning and their career goals. And then also if you can speak to how this will fit in alumni's current, business situation, even if they aren't necessarily in global leadership or looking at that specifically in their area of study. To me, I'm seeing themes and topics that can apply all throughout really any industry or any topic. So can you talk maybe a little bit about how both alumni and students, they can find this beneficial regardless of where they're at and what they're studying?
Well, sure. And I can say that it's applying to people who are practitioners of leadership development as well as scholars, because we'll be presenting a lot of scholarly work and I'll be offering a lot of citations to really dig into the global leadership and globalization research, which could be very helpful for people no matter where they are in their studies today. Because I don't think we'll find that globalization is going to be outside of the scope of any of our jobs anytime soon. In fact, it's just getting more so, getting more important. So I think it's a fundamental skill for all of us, not only as leadership development practitioners, but also as scholars. I also, by then, will have an article finished that I'll make available to our audience that is talking about a new initiative by the dean of one of our bigger business schools to describe how global leaders are going to be developed through the curriculum from undergraduate through to doctoral students. And so I'll be offering not only a scholarly way to approach it, a practical way to approach it for those of us who do coaching or leadership development for a living, but for those who are interested as scholars and practitioners and teachers, a way for you to access this and think about this from the design of curriculum for all of the academic levels that we might be serving. So I'm hoping to have a really broad-based discussion, and hopefully we'll have enough people from each of those backgrounds to join us in July so that we can make it very relevant to their individual needs.
It's fantastic, Louise. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you, number one, for taking the time to speak with us today and share a little bit more about your topic. And on a personal note, I've really enjoyed learning more about you and learning about your expertise and your background. And I'm really excited that you are willing to share your experience with our students and our alumni at National Session. So thank you. So before we go, I do want to put in a little plug for National Session for alumni and students that are listening to this. Registration did start this week. And if you have any questions related to the schedule, how to register, anything that you need, please feel free to email me at alumnirelations@fielding.edu. And as we have up on the screen right here, Louise will be presenting on Friday, July 15th from 1:30 to 4:30. And we're really looking forward to hearing more, Louise, about your presentation. This is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is being recorded and it will be available on my Fielding and other social media outlets. And the last slide here, I want to make sure that if you need to get a hold of Louise, if you have any more questions for her and want to know a little bit more about her, she's been kind enough to share her contact information. And if you need to get in contact for her with anything, she is available to you. Other than that, I think that's the end. We've answered all the questions. Louise, again, thank you so much. It's been quite a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you in Rosemont, Illinois, on July 15th.
I do as well. Thanks, Hillary, so much. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.